Welcome to Athlon U. My name is Braden Gall. Get to me on the internet at Braden Gall.
I'm Stephen Lassen. You can also get to me on the internet at athlonsports.com, covering all things college football. At Athlon Stephen over on Twitter. I'm also on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, Stephen LCFB. You can also find Braden there, but he is again social media shy about his handles.
No, you don't need the handles anymore, Stephen. It's 2025. I don't know if you know that, but you can just say search for me. You'll find me.
I mean, some people think it's like the 1900s some days, I think, but have we done a definitive power ranking of your favorite social media channels or I guess apps?
Look, I think my personal preference of social media apps might be the same. People might care as much about my fantasy baseball team, my bracket, my wagers, as they do about ranking the social media platforms. I don't really like any of them. I'm trying to teach my kids to survive without them, but they need to have emotional intelligence in their communication style, Steven. So I got to let them get out there in the world and learn for themselves, just not on Instagram.
Or Facebook.
Nothing on Meta.
Or TikTok, yeah.
As I'm reading a book about their global policy, which is crazy. All right. Anyway,
Blue Sky is nice though, right? It's nicer.
It is what it is. They all are, whatever. This is a show about college football, Stephen. Okay. So we're going to begin our road trip series, which thank you so much, conference expansion, because conference expansion has allowed us to do this for every conference with a couple of tweaks. This is a spinoff. I don't know how many years have we been doing the college football dream road trip, like almost 10 now, maybe 12. I think it was something like that.
Yeah, that's like one of your greatest ideas, right? It's like the last 10 years we did the national one, and then we started doing conference ones recently. So I guess that's one benefit of conference expansion is we could do these dream road trips.
Yeah, often imitated Stuart Mandel. And I think it was, is it Bruce Feldman that does the Audible with Stuart Mandel? Mm-hmm. They stole my idea and did a dream road trip with the exact same parameters a few years ago. You thieves, intellectual property lawyers are coming after you, boys. All right. Anyway, no. So here's the deal. On the national one, we've got a certain set of rules. We had to tweak it a little bit, but because we have conference expansion and we now have 37 teams in every conference, we can actually do the road trip inside each league and make it a little bit more interesting. So the rules are, you have to see each one of the teams in each conference. So in the Big Ten, that's 37 teams, as I said. You have to see all of them at least one time. You cannot go to a stadium more than once, the same rule on the national level. And the max you can see a team is twice, but you can only see them. You can't see them in the same building. So in theory, you could see Oregon twice on the road because all their good games are on the road this year, for example. So there you go. That's the max you can see a team is 2 times. You have to see all 18 teams in the Big Ten, and you can't go to the same stadium twice. So, did I miss any rules?
You got it. I think that's spot on. I will tell you that I had a heck of a time putting this together, so I cannot wait to see your selections and see if we agree. By the way, Oregon
was hard. It was
Oregon
very hard.
host Indiana this year too. They got one good game at home.
It's hilarious that I almost had that one down one time. But I didn't. I chose another home game because I wanted to go to Outson Stadium. So I also tried to it was hard. It's hard for me to avoid the big moments because I gravitate towards those moments. But I actually did try to be like, no, I'm going to try to find fun things to do. Just random, nonsensical, bizarro things. And here's why. And so we're going to do our dream road trip for the Big Ten this week. We will then execute, of course, Big 12, SEC, ACC group of 5. And then in the summertime, we'll hit our national road trip like we always do. And then we'll try to do some news and notes on the front end of each of these episodes for you guys. So we got a couple of things here to get to before we do. But make sure you have the thumbs up, notifications turned on, like, subscribe, all that stuff on the Athlon Sports YouTube page as well. 5-star review, of course, only on the podcast application of choice. If you do not give us 5 stars, you are a hater. Otherwise, let's get to the news and notes. What do you think?
Surprisingly for the offseason, it's been pretty active, right? So, yeah, let's jump into it.
Yeah, not bad. Deion Sanders is now making $10 million a year, but he won't be coaching in a spring game, as, of course, the NCAA denied the waiver for Syracuse and Colorado, denying us what we've all dreamed of, a Syracuse-Colorado spring game. Actually, I would find that quite entertaining.
We're desperate for college football stuff, right? So, yeah.
Exactly. So, look, the extension, as I've said about every single coach in the history of extensions, They are not worth the paper they're printed on. The coach can leave at any moment. The coach can get fired at any moment. They are for recruiting. They're for the PR hit. They are for a messaging moment. It is good for your team and your fan base to celebrate. Hey, we got a great coach. We're paying him lots of money. It's a signal to recruits. It's a signal to boosters that you're committed. But ultimately, as we saw with Jimbo Fisher, not really worth the paper they're printed on. You can still just fire the guy and pay him $70 million to go away. So $10 million per season for Deion makes him one of the highest paid coaches in college football. I'm more interested in the spring game. Why would the NCAA say no to this?
They cited 3 reasons, and I think 2 of them are legit. One, you are going to roll your eyes at and laugh probably so hard. So I'll say this. I would probably agree with these first 2. So the first one is the late timing. Most teams have planned out their spring practice and in some cases concluded spring practice already. Also, there is the recruiting advantage that these 2 teams could potentially get. The third reason,
that second one seems like, sure, let them do it. I don't keep going.
sure. The third reason, a potential academic impact for the athletes missing classes to participate in practices and a scrimmage.
What?
Yeah, I could not have rolled my eyes harder reading that third reason.
Missed practices. What?
It,
They're still practicing.
yeah,
The spring game's on Saturday. Do they have classes on Saturdays?
we got NCAA tournament games going on Thursday, Friday.
Right. Basketball.
Right.
Florida's basketball players have been away from home for 27 straight days.
Yeah, conference tournaments, NCAA tournaments. So the last reason was probably not a good enough reason, but I thought the late timing of it probably made it a heavy lift for the NCAA to approve it for this year. But for next year, it seems like this is something that might get some more steam.
And honestly, I'm totally fine with that. Like, you guys want to set all these things up across the country, set up home and homes the way you guys do in the regular season, go for it. Let's make sure it doesn't affect the student body calendar. Let's make sure the insurance and make sure liability and health reasons are all well researched and documented. And the recruiting advantage, what are you talking about? Like, is Twitter a recruiting advantage for one recruit because he has more followers? Like, what? I don't understand. Like, if a school decides to spend money on doing something for its fans and that leads to a recruiting advantage, I don't know why it would, but I guess it could.
Because you and I both know there will be some coach out there who complains about this. They'll complain they didn't have the opportunity. They finished their spring. They didn't get a chance to schedule one of these. Do you
coaches complain? Coaches complain about
that? Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a day that ends in Y. So yeah, I mean, you remember the days where conference realignment was hanging on the idea that the Longhorn Network was some sort of unfair recruiting advantage for Texas, and all the schools were really upset about it in the Big 12. Do you remember those days?
Not because anyone watched the Longhorn Network, but because ESPN paid them lots of money, sure.
Yeah.
But yes, I remember what you're talking about.
I guess that was the good old days. We didn't know we were in the good old days until of college football, and now it's gone, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, what are you going to do?
Right.
Look, I think we talked about it. I think it's a good idea. I think it'll be executed at some point. I'm okay with people saying, the NCAA saying, oh, it's a little too soon, a little too haphazard. Let's make sure it's a little bit more formal, but then go ahead and get it all lined up for next year. And honestly, I'm totally fine with the coaches deciding this stuff. Like, hey, he's my buddy. Oh, I know him. Oh, he knows me. Let's get together. Ideally, I think geography would be great. I think geography would be a really great part of this. Syracuse and Colorado, long-time arch rivals and geographic rivals.
Oh, so yeah.
I think that would be more fun, is like a Houston, Texas A&M, that kind of thing. I'd like to see that type of situation. But otherwise, a little geography, a little plan, like some time to plan it. I think it'd be a great idea. So get it all on the books for next year, guys.
I did enjoy Fran Brown. I think this was on Tuesday, saying that basically they should have let Belichick and Bill O'Brien come up with the idea. They probably would have approved it, I guess, kind of just taking shots that Coach Prime and Fran Brown were not the right start for that one.
What is different about Fran Brown and Deion Sanders than Bill O'Brien and Bill Belichick?
I guess just saying that, hey, O'Brien and Belichick have been in the NFL. They've been established head coaches. And
that's what they were saying? Okay.
I think we enjoy Fran Brown, the personality, so I appreciated the
Yes,
candor there this morning, even if I would disagree with that. Like I said,
totally agree.
there's no shame in waiting a year and then getting all your ducks in a row and doing it for 2026.
Totally agree. I would love to see Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky, for example, rivals recruiting in the same area. That'd be a lot of fun. They could play a game in like Nashville. That'd be fun. They both want to recruit this area heavily. You play a neutral site spring game that's not too far. That's like get on the bus and drive 45 minutes. You know what I'm saying? It's not like a long trip. It's no different than going to your stadium. I understand that element would remove like your fans tailgating at your building, which is sort of part of the joy of it all. So I understand that. But I can see for schools like that are on the lower level that want to put their brand in front of more people, saying to folks in Nashville when there's no other football happening, like, hey, come watch a Middle Tennessee, Western Kentucky spring game. I could see that being a very successful sort of Saturday afternoon thing in April. So just be creative is what I would ask. And at least Fran Brown and Deion Sanders, they are nothing if not creative.
I also think that Joey McGuire proposed playing or scrimmaging Colorado at the Star in Dallas. So it feels like
That
there's
feels more corporate-y, but sure.
yeah,
I got you.
it also like could be a preview of a like the Big 12 championship game in some sort of universe this year. So I don't think we really need to see that game in the spring. I
Although
would
it makes sense for Texas Tech to want to put their brand in front of Dallas Fort Worth, though, for sure.
100%. I would
Or Frisco, I should say. Frisco.
Frisco, right. I guess I don't really have a preference necessarily on how they would do it. I think it would be good to see, teams that aren't getting together in the regular season playing. You could go, is it FCS? Is it a G5 team? It's good for their revenue if you can help them out. I don't know. It seems like a good idea to do this. I think we should also be honest with ourselves and say, we're not going to get like we talked about before, we're not going to get South Carolina scrimmaging Florida State and seeing Lenora Sellers play 60 minutes of ball against Florida State's ones.
Yeah, not going to happen. But all right, Frank Reich has been named interim head coach at Stanford. What does that tell you about the job that we spent a lot of time on last week?
I actually think this is a good idea for Stanford because basically it is a 1-year rental. I think it's been made clear that he's not going to be there in 2026. And also there's the familiarity with Andrew Luck and Frank Reich. So I think it makes sense. And also I think it gets at the job, which is it's not an easy job. Hiring a head coach this late in the carousel would have been difficult. So it makes sense basically to have a 1-year stopgap. The problem is their roster has already taken some hits. Two of their starters have transferred. Another receiver is also transferred. So this is pretty much a lost year for Stanford football. And I think having a veteran like him is probably the best path here.
I think the fact that you just said the phrase, it would be pretty difficult to hire a coach this time of year. We're not even till the end. I mean, I guess technically it's April 1st. We're recording this, but like it's still early spring in the calendar. And if Iowa was open, would they have a tough time hiring a full-time coach? I don't think so. If Washington was open right now, would they have a tough time hiring a full-time coach? I don't think so. It might not be perfect, it might not be ideal, but they would hire good coaches would be interested in that job. If you're Alabama and you're open right now, you can hire a baller coach. This is my point. It's not that hard to hire a full-time coach in March if you're a pretty good job. And so I'm curious. I think it says more about Stanford than anything else. If you are a good job or a decent job and that job comes open, it doesn't matter what time of year it is. You're going to have good, attractive candidates.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think the house settlement, how Stanford is going to fund their sports, the revenue, all that has been a kind of a point of, are they going to be more of a well-rounded sports department? How much is going to football? How valuable is football? You basically report to Andrew Luck. We know the AD situation. So there's a lot of dominoes, but I think it also speaks to Stanford now being in the ACC, a little bit in the wilderness. It's a tough job to begin with, and how the whole job NIL situation is going to shape out in the future. I think this is a really hard job, and I think it's a really difficult time when it is a hard job to hire a head coach.
That's sort of what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Is it was a much better job 10 years ago. No question about it. So.
Also, I think in the transfer portal era, it is difficult for a place like a Stanford, like a Duke, like a Vanderbilt to keep your roster together, where in the past you would have said, like, we can recruit these guys, we can develop them, and then by sophomore, junior year, they're really ready to take off. Now in the portal era, you just don't have that time to develop them. Retention is huge, but it's just harder, I think, for those schools.
Yep. Speaking of the portal, one quick NFL observation. Obviously, I cover you guys know this. I covered the Titans here in Nashville, and interesting comments from Brian Callahan, the head coach, about Cam Ward. And his comments are that the portal, and in particular the quarterback situation, the portal has given NFL teams a clearer picture into the off the field analysis and evaluation of a quarterback prospect. Because one of the things you just don't know, and it doesn't matter if you're Abdul Carter, for example, it doesn't matter how you approach a locker room necessarily. I mean, it doesn't matter if there's a learning curve for Abdul Carter going into a new locker room, right? Like he's not there to lead the offense and touch the football in every play. But one of the biggest questions about evaluating quarterbacks is, how do you know how this person is going to step into a locker room full of fully grown millionaire men and lead them? And to me, it's a question of adaptability. And one of the only ways you can really learn about adaptability at the quarterback position in particular is how well do you handle a new situation where you don't know much about this, or this. And Cam Ward has done it a bunch of times. So even though he had the same offensive system, right, in Incarnate Word in Washington State with Eric Ward, he still had
Morris,
to. What did I say? Eric Ward.
Eric
Morris.
Yeah.
Eric Morris. Who's Eric Ward? I don't even know who that is.
Wasn't he? I think he was a receiver in college football at some point. So
yeah, well, sure,
yeah.
Texas Tech's had every single receiver. But I think it's interesting because he's had to step into Washington State, which was an uptick in competition. So a new locker room full of 100 people he didn't really know a lot about. Had to step into that locker room and earn a little bit of respect or sort of with his example or whatever personality, and then an even bigger jump up in competition. All with a new system and new everything, polar opposite personality of the campus to go from Pullman to Miami, just totally different environment and culture. And to show everyone that you could step into that role and sort of command the locker room or gain respect or whatever, handle yourself professionally. I just thought it was interesting that the head coach was speaking very openly in the NFL. He basically was like, it's a really big benefit to the NFL that the portal allows us to see how these players adapt to a new environment, a new situation, being dropped into a new locker room, because that's what they're about to do in the NFL. It makes common sense. It's just one of those things I hadn't thought about as a college guy, that like, oh, wait a second, that makes total sense. And for the coach of the number one pick in the draft, who's scouting Cam Ward pretty heavily right now, to say it very openly, I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that really is interesting. And honestly, it's not something I had really thought about. But I do think, if nothing else, it's obvious that playing time, getting more snaps, getting them in different systems, all that stuff has benefit for draft purposes. But also, I would think, like you said, like the leadership, the intangible, the stuff that's really hard to get if you're not in the facility or kind of in the background of it all. So, I mean, it's interesting. And like I said, some I hadn't thought about, but it does seem like a huge plus for some of these teams to see how, especially quarterbacks, go into 1-year situations, are expected to produce. How do they adapt? How do they grow? How do they change? How do they lead? And obviously Cam Ward has excelled at that at now 3 different schools.
Yeah, and interesting, they were talking about Shedeur Sanders saying, like, we're not worried about NFL money affecting him because he's been around NFL money his whole life. And that's interesting because I'm thinking, like, oh, Carson Beck just got a huge paycheck. And, all these guys that transferred at the top, all these guys got paychecks. And so they kind of know, like, I don't know if I would say that Carson Beck has handled the money well. I don't know. Lamborghinis and high profile relationships. Like I that's the life of a college quarterback, I suppose. So I just think it's interesting that those two things were comments by the head coach of an NFL team that I thought were very interesting as it relates to college, which is the portal is very beneficial for scouting quarterbacks because of what it does to your experience, and that the evaluation of players now coming from how the changing lifestyle of money in the NFL is not as big of an impact on players that have dealt with more of that now because of NIL, and in particular, Shedeur Sanders' case with his father. So honestly, I think Brian Callahan was like, yeah, I think it's a good thing that he's been around his dad the whole time. He's going to have to adapt to not being around him, but he's been around his dad the whole time. Probably prepares him for all the stuff that comes along with being an NFL quarterback. So all of that very common sense. It's just interesting that the Titans have a head coach who's very open and honest, and no college coaches are like that. So I appreciate that from Brian Callahan.
So Cam Ward is going 1, you think, right? I know.
I still think it's like 70-30.
Okay.
I would trade down. It's not necessarily an anti-Cam take. It's more of a Titans roster is really bad take, and there's a lot of really good quarterbacks potentially next year that might be as good. Arch Manning, Drew Aller, Garrett Nussmeier, Lenore Sellers. Like the next year's class is very good.
Are we
In
sure that Arch
quarterback names.
Manning is going to come out, though, given what Eli and Peyton did?
I think that's a common talking point. I've talked to some folks in Texas, and they're all like, yes, he's probably coming out if he has the year everybody expects. I also talked to somebody in the NFL that says that he is far and away the best prospect today, that they would draft him number 1 in the draft today without seeing him start any games outside of the couple that he started last year. They would take him over Cam today at number 1. And so I think it's a balance. You just don't know what makes him tick. I don't think you can put what his 2 uncles did onto him. It's been a very curated process for Arch Manning to this point for a reason. People ask, like, why do you think so highly of Arch Manning? I'm like, I don't know, because all the Mannings have been so bad over the years. Like, it's just like, of course he's good. Have you seen him? Like, he's an extraordinary athlete. He's also one of the most efficient passers in Texas history already in just like 3 starts and some backup time. So I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to be fine. So it's going to come down to, like, are you so good? Are you so good that you can't really go back? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So, but I have talked to some folks around Texas that are like, there's more of a chance that he stays than you think. But as of right now, everybody says they think that he's going to go. If he has the season everybody expects him to have. So I think Nussmeier's the one to watch. I think he's the sneaky one, because I think Sellers is a little overhyped right now. I think the other one to watch is Cade Klubnik. I think Klubnik could move his way up real. I mean, you could have like 6 quarterbacks in the first round next year. So
I would agree. I think that's, I mean, if you're an NFL team, it's hard to bank on that for sure being the case. Somebody could get hurt. Somebody may not develop as you expect. But I think on paper, I think next year's class looks pretty good. So yeah. I mean, it is interesting to see the Jackson Dart, the Tyler Shuck rise in mock drafts. And you're kind of wondering, is that just because we're all bored and we're desperate for quarterbacks, or is there actually like a thing here?
Tyler Shuck is not rising as fast as people and as hard as people think he is. I do think Jackson Dart is up in that second round territory
for sure.
I think that's kind of where he was. I've talked to some of these guys, like they're not moving their boards as much as you think. What's happening is the media is catching up to what the NFL thinks is what's happening, or fans, or whatever. So, all right, you want to get to our Big Ten road trip?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm excited to see your selection here for week 1.
Brutal. All right, so here is the rules. Of course, you have to see all 18 teams in the Big Ten at least one time. You cannot go to a stadium more than one time, and the most you can ever see a team is twice. So in a perfect world, you're seeing your favorite teams and your favorite games once on the road, once at home, and you're trying to find a blend of personal preference, big time moments. There is beauty's totally in the eye of the beholder, and let's ride. What do you think?
Let's fuel up the cruiser and let's take it to week 1. I'm excited to see if we're at the same spot.
I have 5 different road trips that I tried to execute here, all of which start with Texas at Ohio State. I'm not going to the Horseshoe.
Oh, okay.
I am going to the Rose Bowl, baby. Utah at UCLA. Give me an old Pac-12 rivalry featuring no Pac-12 teams in one of the most beautiful settings. Although it will be a little warm, I'd prefer to go to the Rose Bowl later in the year. But you know what? I got to get to the Rose Bowl once. You got to watch UCLA and to play against Utah, to see all the new stuff for Utah in that game too. Just a really fun non-conference game. Very interested in Utah versus UCLA. So I'm at the Rose Bowl.
I love that call, because this was already one of the biggest debates that I had with myself, because there are obviously 3 games with Ohio State. You have to only pick 2. I went to Columbus, though, Braden. It is the potential number 1 versus number 2 or 3 or 4, depending on who you read. Seeing Arch Manning, Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs all on one field. It could be part 1, and then we get part 2 later in the playoff. I just thought after going back and forth on this. I had to go to Texas at Ohio State, but I love your call of Utah because both of those teams are intriguing. Interested to see what Utah looks like early in the year, and of course, UCLA, a ton of new faces as well.
Ohio State will also, of course, play at Wisconsin, at Illinois, and at Washington in a 4-week span. So that's a really interesting stretch there. I don't think any of those three are worthy of beating Ohio State, but maybe the Illinois one's interesting to me. I actually did one where I have Ohio State at Illinois on my list. So I tried hard, man. This was a very difficult exercise. But I'm going Rose Bowl here. You go Texas, Ohio State. All right, where are you going week 2?
I am going to the great state of Iowa. I'm all about rivalries, so I got to see Iowa at Iowa State. Early in the season, Rocco Becht and Iowa State. Interested to see what Iowa looks like with Mark Gronowski. Good matchup of these two teams. It always seems like it comes down to fourth quarter, final plays, pretty thrilling game. So give me the battle for the Cyhawk Trophy, Iowa at Iowa State in week 2.
I only considered 2 games for this, in Iowa and Iowa State's where I started, and then I just kept working and kept working and kept working, and I was like, I don't see Michigan and Oklahoma on the same field very often. I don't feel like you see them on the same field in a regular season game very often, and it just feels like an incredibly important game for both coaching staffs. And so you got the helmet game, you got the importance of it, you got the Big Ten SEC thing, you got coaching staffs that are under a lot of pressure. I am concerned that Bryce Underwood won't be playing. And that's a risky move to put Michigan that early because you might not get Bryce Underwood yet, but maybe he's earned it. I don't know.
I think they will. I think he will.
If he is, then on the road against Oklahoma in a critical year for Brent Venables is just too juicy to pass up. Look, El Asico is great, but I'm going Michigan at Oklahoma.
I have to tell you, this is a little bit of a quirk. So when I did this, I actually had a hard time getting Iowa scheduled in here. So that's actually
not me. Why are you such a hater of Iowa?
No, that's the thing. That's just the way the dominoes fell. I wanted to get to see Iowa twice, and there was a very interesting game that they host a top-ranked team this year, as we know what happens when top-ranked teams play at Iowa. But I just thought, Braden, as you know, I love rivalry games. I just thought, man, Michigan and Oklahoma's great. I got to get to Iowa to see this rivalry, and I didn't. I had trouble slotting in Iowa somewhere else, so it just made a ton of sense to go.
For some reason, the Penn State game at Iowa is less interesting than Oregon at Iowa. I also think that's because the uniforms would look really good together. Again, like Oregon at Iowa, 2 totally different styles. In November, I think it's early November, correct? I believe so. Yeah, week 11, November 8th. I had Oregon at Iowa in every single one of mine, and then I had to make adjustments, for the reasons. All right, where are you going week 3?
Going to SEC country to check out, and Braden, your dad might be here at this game. Wisconsin at Alabama. Wisconsin is another team that I actually had a hard time finding a place to slot in. So I figured good time to see Alabama, good time to get to Tuscaloosa. So I will take Wisconsin at Alabama.
There's a lot of good games for Wisconsin too. I just don't know how good they're going to be. So I was always kind of penciling in Wisconsin with good games. Like, you got Wisconsin at Oregon. But I think the games like Wisconsin at Indiana, Illinois at Wisconsin, Iowa at Wisconsin, Maryland at Wisconsin, I think those are going to be far more interesting than when they have to take on the big teams, when they have to host. I think they play at Michigan, they host Ohio State, they play at Bama. Like, I could see those 3 being total blowouts. I don't know where Wisconsin's going to be this year. That's my concern, and I don't know what they're going to look like. Maybe the defense takes a step forward. I don't know. What do you think? You like Iowa or Wisconsin more?
Iowa.
Yep.
I gotta tell you, Wisconsin's one of those teams that I'm having a really hard time this offseason with. I believed in Luke Fickell when he was hired. A lot of questions this year, pretty heavy on the transfers. Billy Edwards coming in from Maryland to play quarterback, pretty solid pickup there. They're not I think this is maybe the interesting thing. Expectations are going to be pretty low, probably some of the lowest that Wisconsin's had in a couple of years at least.
Yeah,
maybe that works to their benefit. But certainly that I should note that week seems a little thin on options as far as games go. We
Do
agree.
you want, okay? So you want to know where I'm going?
Yeah. Is it
Since
Berkeley?
I'm going Tightwad Hill. That's right. I'm going where all the fun substances are legal. Let's go. Let's go to Berkeley. Minnesota at Cal. What? Lawrence Maroney versus Marshawn Lynch. I
Javid
don't
Best.
I don't know why this is such an interesting game to me. Partly because of what you said. There's not a lot on that weekend. I toyed with USC at Purdue actually to get the Purdue Boilermakers in there, but I found I think I have the most perfect Purdue game of the year. I will enjoy my Purdue game more than everyone else's Purdue game. I'm just telling you right now. Okay, so I'm going Minnesota at Cal. I just like the matchup. I don't know why. It feels like old college football to me. I can't explain it, but I like the game. I think it's fairly evenly matched. I think both coaching staffs are pretty solid, and I think there's I think there's good football X's and O's in this game. And so I don't know. Minnesota and Cal seems like two teams that could be bowl eligible or better, and I'm just kind of like, all right, let's go. I think that'll be fun. Let's go.
I think early in the season too, it's a good opportunity to learn a lot
Yeah.
about both teams. Minnesota and Cal both have turnover, both going to have new quarterbacks. So yeah, I mean Jaden Ott should be healthy this year for Cal. So it is a very unique non-conference game. That was second on my list to Wisconsin and Alabama.
It's redundant. You don't need the very. It's just unique. All right. That I'm channeling our old managing editor there.
I appreciate your umpiring during the show here.
Look, I just call balls and strikes. I'm just a regular Chief Justice. Okay. Where are you going week 4?
I am going to Bloomington to see Illinois at Indiana. I think this is a really interesting early test for both teams. Illinois brings back, I think, 16 returning starters. We know Indiana's rise last year. I think we're both very high on Fernando Mendoza. So give me Illinois at Indiana and what could be a intriguing, potentially important game for positioning in the Big Ten.
Illinois has one of the more interesting schedules this year in general because they're going to get a crack at some big teams, right? They're going to play Ohio State will come to Champaign-Urbana. You got road trips you got rivalry games with like Northwestern and with Wisconsin. They're going to go to Washington, which I'll save my analysis for that one till later because that's just utterly fascinating to me. And they got even the Duke game early in the year, which is like two smart kids schools that are like better at football than you think in an interesting non-conference game. But I'm with you. I'm there. I'm in Bloomington because I had a tough time with Indiana. Actually, I had a tough time getting them on there. I really love the hosting of the Oregon Ducks. I think that's a really interesting one. A little bit later on, or excuse me, going to Oregon. I think that's an interesting one just because Oregon has a lot of games at home that they're probably going to win easily. But I thought Indiana Oregon was interesting. But I had to get Indiana in there somewhere, and I've got plenty of Illinois. So I'm here, man. The rivalry, I like it. Inside the Big Ten, two programs with better quarterbacks than you'd ever imagine in this game. I just think it's going to be a really good football game. So I wanted to see something. Defend the rock, baby. Defend the rock.
Also, and I don't mean this in a mean way, but Bielema and Signetti both have a very subtle way of getting under like people's skin, like an opponent's skin. So that could be maybe there's some fireworks there, like we saw with Beamer and Bielema in the bowl game.
Yeah, I could see a bunch of hand gestures during the game.
Right,
going both ways. Yeah,
Brett. If Illinois wins this game, you can bet there'll be like a Google reference in the post game thing.
Yeah, exactly. All right, week 5 was one of the first games where I was like, not gonna miss it. Not gonna miss it. Where are you going?
I think we're going to be at the same spot. I'm going to Happy Valley. It's a rematch of the Big Ten championship game. Also, good chance to see Oregon early in the year in a high-profile spot. Also, for Penn State, if you want to be a Big Ten champion, if you want to play for the national championship, you got to win this game. So, Oregon at Penn State, easy call. This was one of my must on our schedule.
Honestly, normally you start the Big Ten with one decision: Ohio State, Michigan, or not.
Yeah.
Right? That's sort of how you do it. And I think I started this year with Penn State. And I was sort of saying, their 2 biggest games, their 3 biggest games, their 4 biggest games. What are they? And it's a no-brainer, the 2 games that are most important to Penn State, and one of them is at home against Oregon. So I was like, look, Oregon's got a lot of tough road trips this year, at least really interesting ones, but this was the most important one, and this could be number 1 versus number 2. You never know.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I'm in Happy Valley. It's now or never for Penn State, and there's one other game I'm sure you'll be at with me maybe. Oh, no, you won't be there with me,
Yeah.
but I'll be there. And honestly, that's the one I had to circle and be like, no, that's the most important one. So this is the second most important Penn State game.
That was a hard call. That was a hard call to not go to
Yeah.
that game
Yeah.
that you're referring to later in the
Yeah.
season.
Yeah. All right, week 6, a lot of interesting options here. A lot of interesting stuff. Where are you going in week 6?
I am actually following Penn State out to the West Coast. Good
Ooh.
chance to go to the Rose Bowl. This was the best chance to fit UCLA in. So I am going to Penn State at UCLA. Also consider going to UCLA at UNLV in week 2 just to get to Vegas and also a chance to see UCLA. But like I
Dan
said,
Mullen?
Dan Mullen, Mr. Excitement, Anthony Colandrea, the Virginia transfer at quarterback there for UNLV, but had a hard time finding a good spot for UCLA. So week 6, Penn State at UCLA.
Honestly, the previous week, Ohio State at Washington, you'd want that to be a great game, but I don't know how close it's going to be. Great uniform game. Penn State at UCLA, fantastic uniform game. The setting, the Rose Bowl feels like an old Pac-12 Big Ten rivalry there. Fantastic. But that weekend is great. Wisconsin at Michigan, Washington at Maryland, Minnesota at Ohio State, Illinois at Purdue, and Northwestern. Anytime they host a football game is a good one because of their stadium. But I'm going to the middle of flyover country. I am going Michigan State at Nebraska. Uniform game. Great matchup there. Got to see Nebraska. And honestly, my one of my biggest regrets is not seeing Nebraska a second time. So I wanted to see Nebraska, and it's all in all of its big red glory at home in Lincoln. So give me Michigan State at Nebraska.
Also, first of all, I love that call because to see Aiden Childs and Dylan Raiola match up is a fun battle. But also, week 4, Michigan at Nebraska was one of those ones I was trying to work in
Yeah.
because seeing Michigan go to Lincoln and the 2 quarterbacks. So, I didn't get Nebraska a second time as well, but I like that call to see what we think will be an improved Michigan State squad against an improved Nebraska team too.
And honestly, going back to week 4, like you were talking about, where we both go Illinois at Indiana, Michigan State at USC is really interesting there. Iowa at Rutgers is pretty darn good. Maryland, Wisconsin is pretty balanced. You got Purdue at Notre Dame. Oregon, you got both the Apple Cup and the Civil War in that week. So it was a really interesting week that week. But you're right. Michigan and Nebraska was like, I had that in the list. At one time I did it, and I had Michigan in there 3 times. So I had to decide because I was using Michigan in another game, obviously at home. I had to decide, like, am I going to do – because, like, Michigan's got Wisconsin. They've got USC. Michigan has a ton of really interesting games. And I was like, at Nebraska or at Oklahoma? Which one do I want? They're both basically the same. They're both brilliant helmet uniform, tradition-laden history games. Which one do you want? And I ended up settling for the Oklahoma game. But I also needed to get Indiana in there. So not to rehash it all, but – I'm going Michigan State at Nebraska week 6. You were on Penn State at UCLA in week 6. All right, where are you going? Week 7.
I am seeing Indiana and Oregon for a second time. This was actually one of the games that I locked in early on in the schedule. So Indiana at Oregon, week 7. I think just seeing how Indiana stacks up after last year, they lose some pieces, but we've talked about how much we like Fernando Mendoza and Kirk Cignetti reloading. Oregon want to get out to Autzen Stadium in Eugene and see them play a high profile opponent. So a game that could loom large as well. So I had to take Indiana at Oregon in week 7.
Another week where it's a great example of the 2 different types of games you can select in this, which is random new fun thing, or Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, Oregon, or in this case for me, very tradition-laden historic matchup in the Big Ten. Give me Iowa at Wisconsin. First 1 to 15. No, different type of game now. But I'm going Iowa, Wisconsin. I wanted to see Wisconsin play an old rival. You got to get to Madison because it's just a great place to go. And I actually, like you, I had no problem getting Iowa on the schedule a bunch. So I'm seeing Iowa as many times as I can. And they've got so many interesting matchups with the new teams that I kind of also wanted one with the old. So I toyed with Iowa, Minnesota a little bit later on in the schedule, which is week 9. But Iowa at Wisconsin is where I'm going. I got to go to my hometown. I got to go to Madtown to watch a rivalry game. Sign me up, you know.
I like my call of Indiana at Oregon, but your tradition is it's hard for me to pass up on that because you know how much I love the old rivalries in these conferences. So good call with getting to Madison.
Well, and that's the blend, right? You're going to do
Yeah.
some old rivalries, you're going to do some new fun stuff, and then you want to do some really quirky stuff like Minnesota at Cal, and then you want to do some big time, high profile matchups that are going to decide championships. And so I try to kind of blend all of it together, and then also hit all the rules, of course. So there you go. I'm Iowa at Wisconsin. You're Indiana at Oregon in week number 7. All right, here's the deal. I'm going to go first here on week 8 because normally what do we call them, like tent pole games, or what do we call these games where you like get like locks and there's a few that are big names. But honestly, I wrote this one down because I very specifically my Purdue experience will be better than everyone else's Purdue experience, and my Northwestern experience might be better than everyone else's Northwestern experience. I'm going Purdue at Northwestern. Here's my logic. I was going to get Northwestern at home because I want to go to the stadium. I love the Minnesota at Northwestern game late in the year, but Chicago in November, no thanks. I wanted like beautiful, perfect Chicago weather, and I wanted a good, close, like evenly matched, high quality, interesting, potentially dramatic football game. So give me Purdue at Northwestern on the lake, up there in that cool new situation and facility while they're building another one, obviously. And the weather on October 18th in Chicago is like almost perfect. It might be a touch cool, but like it's still pretty awesome. And I think these two teams are fairly evenly matched. So I will put on record that my Purdue experience will be better than anyone else's.
I don't know about that because I'll tell you my destination later. However, I love the logic that you're using. Number one, getting to Northwestern Stadium, which is pretty cool. And number two, and this is something I wrestled with, is just seeing two teams at the same time. And to your point, they're going to be picked at the bottom of the Big Ten. And I hate to be snarky about this. They're going to be picked at the bottom of the Big Ten. You might as well see them when it's going to be a game that's competitive and not a one-sided affair. So I love the logic on that one.
The weather, the location, and the potential competitive balance. That was my logic. Purdue Northwestern, week number 8. Come along, folks. We're going to eat great food in Chicago. It's going to be great.
I'm going kind of opposite of you because I am going to a high-profile matchup. I am going to South Bend.
Down the road.
Just down the road. So we can hang out together before kickoff. I am going to USC at Notre Dame. Obviously, the pull of the rivalry, the uniforms, also what's at stake. Seeing what USC looks like in the middle of the season. Notre Dame trying to get back to the national championship. So love this series. Had to get USC in there at least once. Got him in there maybe twice. But I think USC at Notre Dame, probably one of the more obviously high-profile non-conference games.
USC's schedule is like, it's not Oklahoma, Florida difficult, but it's got a lot of stuff on there. You got a rivalry with UCLA at the end. You got to go to Oregon, to Nebraska. You got to go to Illinois. All those are tough games. You get a couple of ones that you could win with, at Purdue. You got Michigan State at home, which is interesting. Great uniform there. You get Northwestern, but you're at Notre Dame as well. Michigan at home. So you miss Ohio State and Penn State, but there's a lot of games on there that are potential playoff teams, and it's a really tough schedule. And I don't know what to make of USC this year. I really don't. They're interesting, but I don't know what to make of them.
Also, don't forget Clay Helton making his return to the Coliseum September 6th with Georgia Southern. I think USC will take care of business here, but can you imagine the reaction if Georgia Southern does what they did to Nebraska a few years ago and pull off the upset?
How'd they get that on the schedule? I'd love to know that. All right, week number 9. Where are you going?
I am going to another rivalry game, and this one has been a bit testy, to put it mildly. So I am going to East Lansing to see Michigan at Michigan State for week 9.
No, I mean, nothing to add. Nothing to add there. Great game. It was one of the games that if you made a list of the top 3 or 4 games I'm not going to, that's on it.
I'm always, like I said, I am always pulled in by the rivalry. I also think Michigan State is going to be better. Love the quarterback battle. I'm also hoping that maybe I hope it's contentious, but maybe not the post game scuffles that we've seen over the last couple of years. So again, I'm pulled into the rivalries. Illinois, Washington was also very high on my list for this week as well.
Yeah, I got no problems with Michigan State. I got no problems with the with like fighting on the end. I mean, I don't want my kids to see it, but like, go for it, guys. All right, this is one of those where I was like, why do I really want to go to this game so badly? So number one, I wanted to get to this location. Number two, I think this is a sneaky good matchup, and I think the uniforms are pretty interesting together. Illinois at Washington is where I'm going. This is one of those random new things. Like there was another one I really wanted to go to, which is Washington at Wisconsin. I was like, that sounds like so much fun. A couple of UWs in Madtown late in the year. That's got to be fun. So Illinois, I think, is a little bit better than Wisconsin, and being in Seattle, that's a nice test for Illinois. Washington, that's a moment where hopefully you're better than, you've kind of stabilized the offense. Maybe you're a little bit better at that point. That could be a really important football game to Illinois. And so I just think for some reason I had this one in my mind that I was really interested in going to Seattle to watch Illinois and Washington. Go figure. But that's what I wanted to do. So I'm at Illinois and Washington, week 9, October 25th.
Illinois' schedule, that middle of the season there, they get Ohio State on October 11th, off week, and then the trip to Washington. That's actually that off week is actually come at a pretty good time before you fly out there. So in theory, like if you're Illinois and you're trying to get at the most like optimistic scenario this season, say you did pull off the upset against Ohio State, you don't have the letdown factor on the road. You get a full off week to go to Washington. So the timing of that game is good for Illinois, but also I think what you hinted at is I feel like both of these teams are going to be preseason sleepers in their own little regard. Like Illinois is probably going to be ranked, but they could make a run at the playoff if things break right. Washington won't be picked as high, but I think they're going to be much better. How much better is DeMond Williams in his first full season as the starter? So I think this is a game that is very, very high on my radar of intriguing games this season.
Yeah. Illinois, do they play Ohio State? Yes. Do they play Penn State? Nope. Do they play Oregon? Nope. Do they play Michigan? Nope. You want to make a case for Illinois making the playoff? I just did it.
You get USC, Ohio State at home, and maybe your toughest road games are Wisconsin, Washington, and Indiana.
I mean, yeah, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Washington are your toughest 3 road games. You get Maryland at home, Northwestern at home, Purdue on the road. I mean, they could win a lot of games this year if they're good. So, all right, week 10, where are you going?
Going to Lincoln. Had to get
it's a good one
to Nebraska at some point on this road trip. So great uniform game between USC and Nebraska. It was a great game last year in the Coliseum. I suspect it's going to be just as entertaining this year. To go back to the quarterbacks, Jaden Maivia at USC, where is he in his development? For Nebraska, expecting this team to be a lot better. By week 10, I would think Dylan Raiola very, very much entrenched in Dana Holgerson's system here. So a lot to learn about both teams in a critical year. So give me USC at Nebraska.
Yeah, great matchup there in Lincoln for sure. I think this is the most important game of the regular season in the Big Ten, Penn State at Ohio State. I know it's a little bit cliche to pick this one. I think there are 3 or 4 games that are clearly more important than every other game in the Big Ten. I think Texas at Ohio State is one, maybe, probably the 4th one. I think Oregon at Penn State is another, and I think this is number 1 on the list. Penn State at Ohio State. You guys can guess what the second one is. But this is about showing us that you finally have accomplished the job here, Penn State. Like, that's what this is about. I'm going to be watching you in person when Oregon comes to town, and I'm going to be watching you in person when you're at Ohio State. These are the 2 moments that we will define the Penn State season, and maybe Drew Hour's career, unfortunately. It's not fair, but this is what it is. If you want to be considered the champion and you want to get over the hump and you want to finally accomplish your goals, this is the game you got to probably go win. If you beat Oregon at home, you can lose this one. But this is still a moment where if you lose to Oregon or you slip up somewhere else along the way, you got to play well against Ohio State on the road. You have not gotten over the Ohio State hump yet, and we'll see. But I can't. I started actually doing this with this one not on the list, and then I just kept coming around to being like, I, I don't know. I think I need to do this. Otherwise, it's Rutgers in Illinois, Michigan State, Minnesota, Indiana, Maryland, Purdue, Michigan. It's like, okay, you picked a good one, USC, Nebraska, but Penn State, Ohio State is just too important for me. So I'm going to the shoe.
It has all the makings of like a narrative game or one of those games that could change the narrative or it just continues because Penn State's offense has not played well 2 years in a row against Ohio State. And if they were to go into Columbus and win, maybe you're talking about a different trajectory, certainly for Drew Aller in the passing game. Or we leave that game saying, once again, Penn State fell short and it was an Ohio State rebuilding year. Also, a pretty strong possibility that this might be the first of 2 times they play, perhaps a third time in the playoffs. So just a ton of intrigue for that Penn State Ohio State game this year.
Yeah, no question. All right, week 11, where are you going?
I'm going to do what you did a few weeks ago. I am going to bring out my punter. I'm just punting this week. I'm taking 2 teams. I had a hard time slotting in. I'm going to Maryland at Rutgers. So I got to see these 2 teams. I'm going to get them on the same field. I have no idea what Maryland is going to look like in week 11 because there are so many question marks with this team. Rutgers also pretty good offensive line coming back. Kaliak Manis returns at quarterback. They got a lot of turnover on the defensive side of the ball. So Rutgers probably going to be favored, I think, pretty handily in this game.
Yeah.
But also we'll see what Maryland looks like by week 11.
I am joining you. I will be in Piscataway, New Jersey, with Maryland and Rutgers. I also feel like Maryland and Rutgers belong on a list together because of the way they came into the league from different places. They're both red. They're both Northeastern. They both kind of recruit the same areas. I'm much higher on Rutgers this year than I am Maryland. So I agree with you. It may not be a super close game, but at least it could be an interesting game. And I think 2 teams that are just a cut above the Purdue Northwestern game. So it's actually even a better matchup than the Purdue Northwestern game that I'm going to. Piscataway, not quite the same scenery as on Lake Michigan, but whatever. So I'm with you, man. I'm there with you.
Indiana at Penn State that week. Nebraska at UCLA. Good helmet game.
So here's the one that I had on the first 4 tries I did this. Oregon at Iowa is for some reason so interesting to me. I know I mentioned it earlier, but I'm just so interested in that game. I don't know why. Iowa has just got a lot of really interesting games like that, kind of like old school matchups with Oregon and some others. Speaking of the devil, week 12, where are you going?
I am going to, this is a pure play on a stadium and a location. I am going to Seattle. I am going to Purdue at Washington. I think Purdue is probably the worst team in the Big Ten this year, but this is all about getting to Husky Stadium, to Seattle, and to see all the sights and sounds of Washington and what Jedd Fisch has going on in year 2.
Another really big game for Penn State this weekend. Penn State at Michigan State. I'm with you on any. I wanted to get to Seattle, and I just felt like Illinois was a better fit there. But Minnesota at Oregon, okay, weird. Michigan at Northwestern, all right. Maryland at Illinois, okay. Wisconsin, Indiana could be a pretty good game. But I'm going USC. I'm going to the Coliseum. Iowa at USC. Both of these teams could be really good at this point of the year. I'm not sure. I'd lean maybe more towards Iowa, but 2 totally different styles of offense for Lincoln Riley and defense for Kirk Ferentz. I think it's going to be really interesting. And I think Iowa's the better team. So on the road, that makes it for a more compelling game. I just think great sort of Big Ten, old Pac-12 Rose Bowl style matchup out in Southern California. Give me Iowa at USC. I really like a lot of Iowa's games this year to be entertaining with all the different matchups that they have. They've got a lot of interesting games. In particular, you got El Asico, of course, but you're at Rutgers, you're at Wisconsin, you got Oregon, you're at USC, you got Michigan State, you're at Nebraska, you got Penn State at home. Like they just have a really interesting schedule. So give me Iowa at USC.
In a weird way, it feels like Iowa is going to play a pretty significant role in kind of shaping the Big Ten race because you get Oregon and Penn State at home. And also they play, like you said, USC. Iowa has not played at USC since 1976. It's been a while. And
Good
of course,
there.
this does have the feel of like a Rose Bowl circa like BCS era. So it's kind of a
2002 when they were both very, very good.
They bring back the Brad Banks and Carson Palmer and all that. Yeah. But this is a great uniform game, great X's and O's, great on-field battle.
Yep. All right, where are you going week 13?
Well, we had to do it again. We had to bring out the punter.
Oh, you're going to Ryan Field?
We're going to it. It's gonna be, it's
It's gonna
it's
be
gonna be
cold, dude.
it's gonna be chilly in Northwestern, but Minnesota at Northwestern. We had to see both these teams. Also, should note that I am stopping by the Northwestern Stadium because this game is actually at Wrigley, so
Oh
I'm getting like a
no.
2-for-1 deal here.
No,
I
you're
didn't get
not. You're not getting 2 for 1. You're getting
eh,
0. You're getting 0. You're going to a baseball field. Although that's kind of cool too, I guess.
exactly. It's Wrigley Field. It's a chance to
Be
see,
cold.
the awesome stadium. But I'll stop by the facility there and see
Mhm.
the new stadium and the old stadium, I guess. So Minnesota at Northwestern, week 13. That's my pick.
Guys, the last 2 weeks of the regular season, the Big Ten, are going to be fabulous. Fabulous. You
Oh
got
yeah.
all the rivalries in the final week, but Michigan State at Iowa, really interesting there. Old Big Ten rivalry. Washington at UCLA is awesome. I had that one on the list for a long time. Give me a trip to the Rose Bowl in late November. Hell yeah, against an old Pac-12 rival. That's really good. You've got Illinois, Wisconsin, which are that's a really important game potentially in the standings. Michigan at Maryland. Okay, not great. Rutgers at Ohio State. Interesting. Little Greg Schiano Bowl there. At Nebraska at Penn State. Really good
Mhm.
football game potentially there too. And then where I'm going is Outson Stadium, USC at Oregon. I wanted to see Oregon twice. I wanted to go to the Pacific Northwest. I wanted to go to that stadium, and to see them against USC just feels really fun, even if USC is not capable of winning that game. Also, again, USC is one of those teams that if things break right, they could be very good by the end of the year. So I'm just sort of banking on Oregon's probably better. Oregon's probably going to win, but I wanted to see him, and this is a really big, uniform helmet game, old rivalry. Give me USC, Oregon, up there, and actually the two Pac-12 games in that week are really really good. Before we get to the rivalry game, of course, in the final week of the regular season.
Feels like USC at Oregon or Nebraska at Penn State is probably just the best game of the week for week 13. Don't forget Illinois at Wisconsin
Yeah,
is
Michigan
the
State, Iowa is really good.
is the Burt Bowl.
Yeah,
So got a
no,
lot of to your point, week 14 is all about rivalries, but week 13 is also pretty darn intriguing too.
it's like old rivalries.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
All right, I'm doing Ohio State, Michigan, week 14. That's I tried other ways to do UCLA and USC, and Indiana Purdue is interesting as well. Like there's fillers there, right? Wisconsin, Minnesota is a good way to get both of them on your schedule. Oregon and Washington is just one of the most aesthetically pleasing rivalries in all of college football. Lots of reasons to go to other ones. Iowa, Nebraska is a great game, and it's a great week if you want to fill with something else other than Ohio State, Michigan. But I just because it's at Michigan, because Ohio State's the defending champ after what happened last year. I had to go to this one, so I'm at the big house, Ohio State at Michigan.
I'm joining you. This one was from the start the easiest game to lock in on the schedule. For obvious reasons, even if you take away the last couple years, the rivalry angle, but also for what's happened in recent memory with Michigan knocking off Ohio State last year, what happened after the game. Also, by this point of the season, I think Bryce Underwood and Julian Sayin should be very settled into the starting job. And you're talking about two guys that have had 11 games under their belt. So we'll get a kind of full experience with both of them. So trying to see if Ohio State can win at Michigan, or does Michigan make it 5 in a row over the Buckeyes? To me, this is the slam dunk number one, easiest, best game of the year in the Big Ten again.
I'm looking at I totally agree, and I'm kind of looking at the rankings right now, and I'm having a tough time with like Wisconsin, Washington, Minnesota, Indiana. I'm just having a tough time with where these teams are all going to rank, and I think I feel good about the bottom tier, kind of knowing who they are. But this is a very, very healthy middle tier of teams, and that's including I've got Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Indiana, Wisconsin, USC, Washington. That's a really healthy potential middle chunk, and that doesn't include Rutgers or Minnesota, both of whom could be pretty solid. At least bowl eligible teams, in which case they can kind of beat anybody. So I don't know where you're at on what. Honestly, that big huge Rutgers Washington game, which was a really good Friday night game last year, that could be a really big pecking order game. Honestly, So I don't know what to make of this conference right now.
I think to go back to something that we have talked about some over the last 2 years when it comes to conference expansion, probably who you don't play is probably going to loom very large for like the middle tier in sorting this out. I feel pretty good about which teams are at the top. It's some sort of order between Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon. And then after that, I think, you get into the Illinois, Michigan, Indiana tier. But
Nebraska, Iowa.
yeah, and then that brings to kind of the next stage of teams, which is Nebraska, I think USC, Iowa. Then there's that next tier with like Wisconsin, Michigan State, like
Rutgers, Washington, yeah.
right, all of those. Like some of these teams are going to take a pretty big step forward,
Yep.
and trying to figure out who they are right now is difficult.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. What a great! This is why they expanded, of course, is to have all these different new games and these new tiers, and to have Oregon as high up on that list, to have USC not even close to its own stride, but still upper half and interesting. There's still more growth for this league with those other teams. Like we're not seeing USC or Nebraska at its peak right now. So we shall see. We shall see.
And also fair to say, like, what is Michigan? Like, we think they'll be better this year, but like, what if Bryce Underwood just needs another year or two?
Yeah.
So
I think they've got a lot of baked in like floor to with their defensive talent and their physicality running the football. I think they're going to win some games like that. And so they can kind of like slow play their way to a good quarterback, meaning allow him to develop. And sure, they might be closer to 9-3 or 8-4, but like that's still a good football team, close to the top tier. So Michigan, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, USC, Indiana. That's a really interesting group of teams. Wisconsin's in there, maybe Rutgers. Like, it's just a really interesting group of teams in the middle there. So,
yeah, the middle is very strong. The bottom also seems very clear. Purdue brings back one starter this year. That is Devin McCoby, the standout running back. So I think it's pretty easy to pencil in like Purdue, Northwestern, Maryland, UCLA, some order on the bottom tier of the Big Ten. But still some intrigue with each one of those teams too.
Absolutely. Should be a lot of fun. Should be a great exercise. You guys send them to us if you want. Thumbs up on the notifications on the YouTube page, but you can tweet us if you want or email us, whatever you want to do. If you have a Big Ten road trip you want to share, we'd love to see them. It's always fun to get those from you guys, so we do appreciate all that. Steven, what else you got for the good folks?
We have a ton of spring stuff up at Athlon Sports for college football, whether it's my very early projected starting quarterbacks for every team, some pre-spring 136 rankings. So all that up there. We are hard at work on the magazine. So that is going to be coming out soon. Don't forget about the draft, MLB, racing, and the Eagles Super Bowl magazine, all available from Athlon Sports. As if you're watching on the YouTube, Braden is holding up a fantastic Athlon Sports NFL Draft magazine with Deion Sanders and Travis Hunter on the cover.
There you go. Go get your magazine today on newsstands everywhere. Athlon Sports, athlonsports.com, and on the socials, the YouTube page as well. For Steven, I am Braden. Thanks for coming along on our Big Ten road trip. We'll do more of those over the course of the next few weeks, so we do appreciate you guys hanging out. Share those with us, of course, as well. Otherwise, Steven, that's about it for us. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.